Are the Ravens still the favorites in the AFC North coming out of their bye? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We return here another week of Ravens football talk. Now, there's not a game for us to talk about here. There's no Victory Monday. There's no non-Victory Monday for this Ravens team, as it was their bye week during Week 8. But there was a full slate of football action. The Ravens were just not on it. And I know for some people who have gone through, the many years of the Ravens and having those close down to the wire finishes, and even just watching the team in general, it's a pretty stress-free weekend, all things considered, but you're still rooting for and against certain teams to help out the Ravens. And despite the Ravens not even doing anything yesterday, they reclaimed first place in the AFC North with the Cincinnati Bengals loss to the New York Jets. So we'll talk about all of that and more, because I think it's important to go into detail about just what the vibe was on the AFC North before the year began and what it is now, because I think stuff has changed. A lot of things have changed, both with obviously the Ravens and then with their other AFC North divisional foes. A lot has changed there. So I did want to place an emphasis on that today. And honestly, throughout the week as well, I do want to talk about it for a couple more episodes or segments throughout the week, because I think it is so important kind of coming out of the bye to talk about that kind of stuff for the Ravens. So in the second segment, I do just want to go over how the AFC North looks, what the Steelers and the Bengals and the Browns have done this year, what they're looking like, and if the Ravens still are the favorites. And in the third segment, I kind of want to piggyback off of that and talk about the entire AFC, because really, to me, the AFC seems very wide open. Not just the AFC North, but the AFC as well. They're obviously the favorites, and they will be the favorites, and they're favorites for a reason. They're good football teams. The Ravens are in there. But I do want to just talk about what teams look good, the playoff picture as it stands right now, and more. In the first segment, more coming out of the bye stuff, I did want to talk a bit about just a state of the Ravens, I guess, because I know we talked about it a lot last week with Spencer Schultz and with Engraven Vids and just by myself as well. But I do just want to do a final. All right, the Ravens are coming out of their bye. How do they look? What do they need to improve on? What has looked good so far? So just doing that here in this first segment. So we'll dive into all of that here. Before we do that, though, if you're following along with us here on YouTube, where you can see my face and my background and everything, be sure, if you like our content here, to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It really helps out on the YouTube algorithm, so our content gets in front of more people, more Ravens fans and even non-Ravens fans, so that they can listen and watch it anytime they want to. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you know when our content comes out. And also, if you're following along with us on audio form, be sure to follow us, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, anywhere you get your audio podcast. Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time is when we put out our content. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter. My personal account is at ChaosStriker34, and also follow the Locked On Ravens account. That is at Locked On Ravens. So with all that being said, let's talk about the state of the Ravens right now. All things considered, we all know about the injuries. The injuries were a pretty brutal blow, especially before the season even starts. This team loses Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and Marcus Peters, and they're working without Rashad Bateman and Jimmy Smith and a bunch of other guys as well. Derek Wolfe still waiting for Nick Boyle, and Ronnie Stanley's coming back and all this stuff. And then you have, I guess it's just like the injuries never really stop. Now, the season-ending injuries, there haven't been, all things considered, a ton for them outside of the ones that happened before the season. There have been a couple, but, they saw LJ Fort go down before the year, and they saw a couple others go down before the year. But it really hasn't been, if you want to classify Ronnie Stanley as season ending, yes, that is a thing. But outside of that, just a couple more. But it has been just a couple multi-week injuries, for example, like Chris Westry, and you have Ben Cleveland and Tyree Phillips and a few other guys as well. Sammy Watkins, Latavius Murray's missed a week. So it's just the shuffling that continues to happen, not just on the offense, but on the defense. It can be crippling to some teams, because depending on how much good and quality depth you have, they can be an issue. But the Ravens have shown their resiliency, and they've shown the ability to pivot and move on to new players who can fit certain roles, especially, we can talk about the running back position with Murray and with Devonta Freeman, with Le'Veon Bell. Now, that's one of the things the Ravens do need to improve upon. I think the run game in general has really been a bit underwhelming this season. And, when you look at the actual statistics, it's not going to say that to you, right? The Ravens are 6th in attempts. They're 4th in rushing yards, 4th in rushing touchdowns, 6th in yards per attempt with 4.9. But that's inflated by a couple of good games early in the season. They had the good game against the Los Angeles Chargers in week 6, but it just hasn't been the same Ravens football, this ground and pound style. And look, to be fair, they haven't had to rely on it as much because of Lamar Jackson. One of the things that has looked good this year, his passing has improved tremendously. He's taken that year 4 leap. And that's something that I hope he can continue to build upon. And I think he can, especially as he gets Sammy Watkins back into this offense, as Rashad Bateman continues to get caught up to speed because he is a rookie still learning the NFL game, of course, after missing the first 5 games of his NFL career. So the Lamar Jackson has a ton of weapons, but the run game, it's just not really working this year to the full extent. And you can kind of tell, right? You can tell who watches the Ravens in depth and who just kind of looks at those box score stats, because anybody who sees the stats are like, hey, the Ravens are a good rushing offense. But if you really watch them, you can kind of tell it just hasn't looked the same this season. So maybe a trade's in the works. Maybe the Ravens trust their guys. We'll find out in a couple days. But I do think that for the Ravens, they have some work to do there. The offensive line has definitely not been amazing this year. Again, that's a position that has gone through just a ton of injuries. And whether it is Phillips or Cleveland or Stanley or McCurry or whoever you want to talk about, it's a lot. And they've been shuffling guys in and out. The offensive line combinations, I talked about it during the offseason. I said, hey, look, the offensive line, because they were going through injuries during training camp, I said, it's probably going to take a couple weeks, maybe a month or two to get these guys comfortable playing next to each other because they've been shuffling so many guys in training camp. And it hasn't really gotten that much better, all things considered, with the injuries that this team has gone through. It's been, all right, Patrick McCurry plays really well at right tackle. Oh, no, he's out for a couple weeks with a high ankle sprain. Now who comes in? Is it Cedric Ogbuehi, who just signed the practice squad last week? Tyree Phillips plays really well at left guard. He gets injured. In comes the tandem of Ben Powers and Ben Cleveland. Then Cleveland gets hurt. So it's just, and then Stanley doesn't play. And then Villanueva's moving over from the left side to the right side in the offseason, coming back from the right side to the left side after week 1. So it's just so much shuffling. So I give them a bit of a pass, but at the same time, this isn't like we're in week 3. It's not like we're in week 4. We're in week 9, right? This is week 9 that we're in right now, and they still really haven't figured it out as much as I would have liked them to. They have spurts where they look really, really good. But, the offensive line, just the run blocking is very subpar. The pass protection goes through spurts where it's really good, and then it just falls off a cliff. I think we saw that a bit in Los Angeles or with Los Angeles and also with Cincinnati. I think just consistency is the key there. And then on defense, tell me if you heard this one before, but tackling is the big issue that this team has to go through and work through right now. Hopefully the coaches have put a huge emphasis on that. They have said they have been doing that, and they say they're going to continue to do that, but it really is important. It's one of the first things you learn. Patrick Queen's been put as the poster boy for it, but it's the whole defense. The whole defense just has not been good at tackling, but there are positives. The run defense overall has looked pretty good. There are some games where they can't stop anything. I'm not going to say it's been perfect, but the run defense right now to me is the strength. The pass defense has been horrific. It's been pretty embarrassing. The Ravens have lost Marcus Peters for the year. He's not coming back. They have to learn to cope with that and deal with that. They've had Marlon Humphrey have really strong games outside of Cincinnati. They've had Anthony Averett have really strong games outside of Indianapolis. The safety tandem of Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott's played really, really well, but they just can't put it all together, it seems like. So hopefully they'll be able to do that after the bye. But this team is 5-2. They've dealt with many, many injuries. They have gone through a lot in terms of close games. And again, that's why I think the loss of Cincinnati was so important, because as I've said before, the winning mentality of a team, even if it's a close one, even if it's a game that you shouldn't have won, the winning mentality, I think it kind of puts off issues. Not that the Ravens coaching staff is looking and saying, oh, we'll fix it next week or we'll fix it the next week. They're looking to fix stuff all the time and improve their team. But after a blowout loss at home to a division rival in embarrassing fashion, it makes it take a step back and say, oh, wow, we really, we're 5-2 right now, but if we keep playing like we're playing, it won't be sustainable and stuff in terms of, hey, all these close games, they can win them, and they've shown that they can win them, but they lost against Los Angeles against Las Vegas, in a close game. So it's not like they're going to win every single close game. They needed that 4th and 19. They needed the 66-yard field goal. The forced fumble by Odafe Oweh. They needed the comeback. And that's not to take away from that. Like, it's all great. It's all phenomenal that they have the players who can be put in those situations and perform. A win is a win regardless of whether they win it by 1 point or win it by 50 points. If they go 1-0, that's the ultimate goal. But in order to secure those wins or make those wins more likely, I do think that the pass defense has to improve, the tackling has to improve, the offensive line has to improve, the run game has to improve, the consistency of Lamar Jackson and his deep ball accuracy a bit and his decision-making has to improve. Every team has areas to improve, and the Ravens are actually going to improve in a lot of different areas when they get guys back, like Nick Boyle and Derek Wolfe and Chris Westry and Sammy Watkins and Latavius Murray and all these different players who have either missed all the season or have missed multiple weeks and have really put a dent in both the offense and the defense, and the Ravens have still found a way to be 5-2, which I think is very, very impressive. I give a lot of credit to the Ravens. I give a lot of credit to the staff, the players, the executives, everybody in that organization for what they've been able to do. It hasn't been perfect. I know the loss kind of puts a damper on things because you have to kind of think about it going into a bye and then coming out of the bye. You think about it for 2 weeks, but I think if Baltimore can put together a string of 2 or 3 really nice games here, they can head into a really brutal end of season schedule with nice momentum, and that can play a very huge part in everything. So the state of the Ravens right now, it's not perfect. It will never be perfect, but I'm very impressed with what they have done this season, and hopefully they can continue to grow and build on that 5-2 record. We're going to head into our first break now, though. When we return, we're going to be diving into a bit of an AFC North breakdown and talking about if the Ravens are still the favorites through 8 weeks, so stay tuned for that. But does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friends logging for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of that clutter and the confusion and get your TV together today with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. We return here. It's our second segment of this Locked On Ravens Monday edition episode. Your host, Kevin Ostreicher, still hanging out with you here. And as we dive into the Ravens and just the end of bye week maintenance, I guess I'll call it, we have a lot to talk about. We just talked about the state of the Ravens and kind of going through the last bit of, hey, what does this team need to improve? What has looked good and everything? But while the stuff has looked good and while other stuff has not, you can talk about the wide receivers looking good and Lamar Jackson and his passing offense looking good and even the coordinators and the run defense and a couple of individual players on defense looking good. There's that stuff to improve, as we talked about, like the run defense and the offensive line and the pass defense and the tackling, etc. But as we talk about in the second segment here, I want to transition into the AFC North because I think the AFC North is one of the most talented divisions in the entire NFL. And I know coming into the year, there was a lot of chatter about just who was going to come out on top. Now, the Ravens were not the victors last year of the AFC North as the Pittsburgh Steelers started off hot. They kind of came back down to earth during the end of the year, but they were the division title winners last year. Right now, as I kind of mentioned in the opening to the show, the Ravens do have the best record in the AFC North right now. And they didn't have to do anything. They sat at home and they watched themselves catapult back up. The Bengals losing to the New York Jets. They lost 34-31 in New York in the Meadowlands. So, I guess a big thank you to the New York Jets for beating the Bengals, knocking them off. The Bengals, clear trap game here, coming off of a very big win against a division rival away. They won at M&T Stadium and just dominated the Ravens. And so that is where teams can kind of get a little too high on themselves to see, for example, a Jets team that, wasn't performing that well coming into the year, but Mike White, wearing number 5, comes into that game. The Jets score in their final 6 possessions, and Mike White in his first start leads the New York Jets to a win. So the Bengals fall to 5-3, and then where in the AFC North, other places in the AFC North, the Ravens have 2 teams play each other in the Pittsburgh Steelers and in the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns end up losing to the Steelers. The Steelers win 15-10. Very defensive struggle, but I think the Steelers defense is eons better than the Browns. So, you look at those scores and you see close games. This division is very, very talented. Now, coming into the season, I know Baltimore is favored by a lot of people, myself included. I also saw the Cleveland hype and the Cleveland chatter and people saying that, oh, yeah, this Cleveland team, they're going to do it. They're going to win the North this year. They're going to get the number 1 seed or whatever. That people were hyping up Cleveland. But for the most part, I will say most people had Baltimore, but it was very close between Baltimore and Cleveland. Now, my question is, through 8 weeks, are the Ravens still the favorites to win the AFC North? And in my opinion, the answer is absolutely yes. The AFC North is such a wide open division this year. And, it seems like at this point, we really have like a very clear favorite at this time of the year. Not to say that that's the team that always goes on to win, but whether it's through record or through recent performance, it seems like there's always a team that kind of, I don't know, has that edge. And this year, it seems like it's the Ravens, but at the same time, coming off of that huge divisional loss, the AFC North becomes wide open. Then it's the Bengals, right? But then the Bengals have that loss of the Jets. So the Steelers, I think even with Mike Tomlin at the helm and how talented their defense is, I don't think Ben Roethlisberger can get them there this year. Cleveland's going through a bunch of injuries themselves. And I just, even with their talent on both sides of the ball, I love what Jabari's done there. I just don't see a way that they can, I don't necessarily say come back because I think they can do that, but I see it right now as a 2-team race between the Ravens and the Bengals. The way I see it that way, or why I see it that way, is because the Bengals have a pretty easy back half of their schedule. I'm not saying it's a cakewalk, but they do have a lot of beatable opponents considering how well they've played. Now, when looking at strengths and weaknesses of teams here, when looking at Baltimore, we talked about it a bit in that first segment, the pass defense, the tackling, the run game, and even a bit more, just a couple of things sprinkled in, obviously. I think when you look at Cincinnati, their defense definitely has some issues. Now, the defense played really well against Baltimore, but against the Jets, it kind of regressed a lot and kind of went back to what I think a lot of people were expecting, which was improvement, but not necessarily a top 10 unit. So I think the Bengals still have issues on defense. And then also, I think the offensive line, it has definitely improved this year, but there are still a couple of holes there that sometimes can be exploited. Definitely. I mean, we saw what Justin Houston was doing to Jonah Williams in the first half and even throughout the game of that Bengals-Ravens game there. Cleveland, it's the defense. I still think, they played a good game against Pittsburgh, but when looking at Pittsburgh's weaknesses, the offense can be high flying, but it goes as far as Ben Roethlisberger can take them. The offensive line has looked a lot better than I think people expected, but still not amazing. And I think that's saying something. The defense is the defense, but they have gone through a couple of injuries there. Not a ton to say, hey, this derailing the year, but I think with all of that considered, there's no team in the NFL really that is like that perfect, oh yeah, this is a perfect team with the best offense and the best defense and the best special teams. But every time AFC North opponents match up, it's always very intense, always very close, physical games for the most part. Now, I know you can talk about Cincinnati and their games with Baltimore over the last couple of seasons outside of this last one. I mean, even Cincinnati blew out Baltimore in this one. So those games have been blowouts for the most part recently. Cleveland's been blown out by Baltimore a little bit. We've seen Cincinnati get blown out by a couple teams as well, like Pittsburgh. But these are all very talented teams with guys like Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield and Joe Burrow and all those types of quarterbacks at the helm. Ben Roethlisberger as well, obviously, but he right now is my worst quarterback in the AFC North. But I think Baltimore, as they continue to get healthy, that is where I think they're going to have the advantage. Because at the moment, you have teams like Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Cincinnati and teams throughout the league. We'll talk about this in the third segment, but teams throughout the league who are dealing with injuries and guys who have gone on short-term IR, or they're getting those guys back. But the way that Nick Boyle impacts this Ravens offense, the way that Derek Wolfe can impact this Ravens defense, and et cetera, I think getting those guys back is going to be so huge. I think the Ravens, they've shown that over the past couple of years, they have been a great second half team, regardless of their schedule. Now, last season, you have to admit, their back half of the schedule was very, very easy, and they ended up having their last 5 opponents be pretty beatable teams. This year, it's a lot different. 5 of the last 7 come against divisional opponents, and the last 2 that aren't divisional opponents are the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams. So the Ravens have a tough challenge ahead. Scheduling comes into effect, but I think the Ravens are the the most well-balanced team, especially considering I think they're going to get it together. It all depends on if they can, though. If they can, if they continue to struggle tackling, if they can't get their run game going and have to rely on the pass game, that's going to be the big issue. But I see the Ravens, probably still winning the AFC North this year. I'm pretty confident in that. They haven't shown me any reason why, compared to the other teams in the AFC North who also have their fair share of issues, they can't do that. They're going to have to play good football in the second half of the year, though. If they can't rattle off a couple of wins here against Minnesota and Miami and Chicago, they might have a tough task starting in week 12 when they have that Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cleveland kind of thing. And then they have to go and play a bunch of other quality teams, including Green Bay and Los Angeles and the like. So I think Baltimore's my favorite. I think Cincinnati's second. Then you have Cleveland. Then you have Pittsburgh. I think that's where I am right now. I'm not saying that no team can't win the division. I think every team has a shot right now, but Baltimore to me is my pick because, if it comes down to it, the Lamar Jackson effect and just what he can do on the football field, how he can win close games and will his team to victory, how I don't think the Ravens being in the bottom third of the NFL in pass defense is sustainable, in my opinion. I think they can improve upon that. Same thing with tackling. They're all fixable issues. It's just a matter of, can they fix them? And if they can, I think the division is theirs. But if they can't, then I think we're having a bit of a different conversation because then it becomes a lot more difficult. But for now, I'm saying Baltimore are still the favorites in the AFC North. We're going to head into our final breakdown. When we return, we're going to be getting into the AFC a bit and talking about how wide open it is. So stay tuned for that. But Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you're missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars, they're chalky or waxy or just plain hard to choke down. A Built Bar is soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 50% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Also, we're back and better than ever. A new web interface for the start of basketball and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head on to our new website, updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas seasonal games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. We return here, our final segment of this Locked On Ravens Monday edition. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And we've talked about the state of the Ravens, and we've talked about just what this AFC North division looks like, and if the Ravens are still the favorite. Spoiler, my answer was yes. But now I think it's time to talk about the AFC in general. And even we can kind of have this bleed into the NFL a little bit and talk about the whole NFL. Because I think personally, starting with the AFC, it's a very wide open conference. For how many good teams are in the AFC this season, it just seems like none of them have really hit that switch yet. I think a prime example of that is the Kansas City Chiefs, who right now, when looking at the actual playoff standings and the playoff picture, are 11th at 3-4. Now, this is recorded before Monday Night Football. So, that obviously could change. They can move up to 4-4, but the playoff picture, I'll just run down really quickly in the AFC. Tennessee right now is 6-2 is number 1. Las Vegas is number 2 at 5-2. Baltimore is number 3 at 5-2. Buffalo number 4 at 5-2. Cincinnati number 5 at 5-3. Pittsburgh number 6 at 4-3. And the Los Angeles Chargers at number 7 at 4-3. Then you have New England at 4-4. You have Cleveland at 4-4. Denver at 4-4. And then Kansas City at 3-4. So those are the top 11 in the AFC right now at this time of recording. Personally, there are a lot of good teams here. But again, none of them have really put everything together yet. It looks like Tennessee is doing a great job this season. I've been impressed with how they've performed this year. Las Vegas, I think they're going to be more on the downturn as the season continues to progress. No shot at them. I'm not trying to downplay what they've done this season. I think has been impressive, but I don't know. I don't see it this year for them. Baltimore, I've talked about them. I think they have a good shot here. Buffalo, I think they're going to finish as number 1 seed in the AFC. That's just me. I think they have a very easy schedule. I think they're also a very talented team. So I think that's my pick for number 1 in the AFC. Then you have Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Los Angeles and New England and Cleveland. It's those teams. I think Cincinnati makes the playoffs this year. I think Pittsburgh falls out of the picture. I think Los Angeles stays in the picture. I think New England is a dark horse candidate. You talk about Cleveland, I think that they kind of boost themselves into the playoff picture. And Denver, I don't see them making it this year. And then Kansas City, I think it'd be foolish not to count them in the playoffs this year. I think with Mahomes and Andy Reid and all those offensive weapons, despite how bad the defense is, I think they'll figure it out. But that's just it, right? For a team like Kansas City, who Baltimore beat for the first time in 4 seasons, it's the weaknesses. Again, we talked about it with the AFC North and with the Ravens. With Kansas City, their defense is atrocious. It's terrible. And that's when going up against the Baltimore offense, they figured it out, right? Baltimore's offense figured it out, and they beat the Chiefs. Now, again, it took an Odafe Owe fumble and a Lamar Jackson 4th down conversion, but they won the football game. And in the playoffs, it doesn't matter how you win it. It matters that you win it. And same thing in the regular season, honestly. So all these teams have their weaknesses. I think out of the whole AFC right now, Buffalo is the most complete team. They still have some stuff to figure out, but I think they are the most complete team. So that's why I have them as the number 1 seed. But, I don't see a reason why Baltimore can't finish with 13, 12, 11 wins here. I think my low floor for them is 10, and that's at the very, very low end. I see them still being around a 12-5 football team, and I don't think that's bad considering the second half of the schedule and everything that they have gone through this season. I had them at 6-1 at this point. They're 5-2, so I was 1 loss off. I accept it. I was 1 loss off. I was wrong, but I still think I was pretty close. And all things considered, again, getting 3 straight wins against the Vikings and the Dolphins and the Bears before heading into that stretch is really important. But then when you hit the playoffs, there's only 1 bye. So assuming Buffalo gets the number 1 seed, they'll get that bye. I think it's better for Baltimore to play, honestly. We saw what happened 2 years ago with the whole Tennessee in the divisional round debacle where the Ravens rest their starters and they have the bye week. And then obviously they lost to Tennessee. But I think that the Ravens would love to see Tennessee again. I think they'd love to see Buffalo again. They're not going to back down from any challenge here, even if they haven't played them this season. And just going back to the playoff picture, there are a bunch of tiebreakers and percentages, right? The Raiders have the percent or the tiebreaker over Baltimore right now. Baltimore right now has the tiebreaker over Buffalo because of strength of schedule, strength of victory. So that's been important. Same thing with Pittsburgh versus Los Angeles. Pittsburgh has the tiebreaker over Los Angeles because of strength of victory. So when we get down into the week 16s, the week 17s, the week 18s, and we're talking about, hey, the Ravens beat Kansas City, they have that tiebreaker. The Ravens beat the Chargers, they have that tiebreaker. They lose to Los Angeles or Las Vegas, second time I've done that. They don't have that tiebreaker with the Raiders. So a bunch of different things to look at here. But this is a wide open conference. And trickling over into the NFL, it's the same thing in the NFC. Now, the NFC is, I think, more top heavy than the AFC is. Right now, you have the Cardinals and the Packers. And if you want, let's look at the actual playoff picture in the NFC. You have Green Bay at 7-1, Arizona 7-1, Dallas 6-1. You have Tampa at 6-2. There's Los Angeles at 7-1, New Orleans 5-2, Carolina 4-4. So for me, it's top heavy. I put it at the Saints. The top 6 teams in the NFC are extremely talented teams. You get to Carolina, and that's where the huge drop-off comes to me. Seattle, I think, is a lot better than their record right now. They're missing Russell Wilson, so I'd even put them in the conversation into the top 7 teams. So the playoff picture is very, very talented when let's say you put Seattle over Carolina at this point. But at the same time, I think the AFC definitely has more of, a talented pool of teams throughout the entire conference, but at the same time, it makes it so that, top 10, 11, 12 teams are all like, hey, that's a talented football team right there. And I'm not saying that any team in the NFL isn't talented. I'm not trying to bash any NFL team here and say, oh, they're terrible. But in terms of actual who has the talent, who's performing well, the coaching staff, the organization, I think the NFC is more top heavy, but the AFC has more talented overall teams. So that's why I think it's wide open, because there are so many talented teams at the AFC or in the AFC that anybody can take it. Baltimore has, I think, as good of a shot as anyone. I think they are a top 4 team in the AFC right now, but it is going to depend on if they can continue to improve. And that's what I keep coming back to, because it is so, so important. So Baltimore, I think, is in good shape. It hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been pretty by any stretch of the imagination, but these next 3 weeks, in my opinion, are going to tell a lot about this Baltimore team. And really, if they drop one game to teams that, Minnesota, Miami, and Chicago, those are 3 teams they should beat. So if they can't beat one of them, just one of them, honestly, I think that then they'll start to be a bit more questioning of this team creeping up before they head into that back half of their schedule. But for now, I'm saying Baltimore is a favorite in the AFC North, and I'm saying Baltimore is one of the best teams in the AFC, but can they continue to build? That's the question. That's all that I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we dive into more Ravens talk, of course, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.